Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You're very, very welcome to the webinar this evening, which has been organised by the Horticultural Development Department in Teagasc. My name is Andy Welton, and I'm your co-host this evening. With me is my colleague Owen Sweetenham, who you'll see on screen there. Owen is recently appointed veg specialist based at Ashtown, and he replaced Stephen Alexander, who a lot of you knew. He retired late last year. So, like I say, you're very, very welcome. Our topic tonight is the whole business of soil health and sustainability of soil health. And I suppose it's become a bit of a buzzword in recent times. A few years ago, I would never have come across the term soil health, but it seems to be a very topical term used when there's any conversations about soil in recent years. So I think it's fair to say that, you know, on our side of the house, in horticulture and specifically in vegetable production, our soils are coming under a lot of pressure, particularly given the intensity of field cultivations, very necessary a lot of the time in vegetable production. But, you know, couple that with harvesting at times of the year when weather is bad and conditions are fairly rough. It's all causing major threats to our soils in terms of compaction, erosion, and you know, overall weakening of soil structure. So look, it's a big topic. We're not intending on covering all of the aspects of soil and soil health tonight. But we certainly hope that we're going to shine a light with the lineup of speakers that we have on some of the elements of soil health. And we're joined by two of our colleagues. We've got Dermot Forristal from our department, the research crops research unit in Oak Park, and also Mark Plunkett, who is one from the specialist service down in Johnstown Castle. And we're delighted as well to have David Thomas, who's joining us from Riveira Produce in Cornwall tonight. And I think all three of our speakers are going to, you know, they all have valuable contributions to make in terms of our topic. So look, before we come to our presentations, I just have one or two housekeeping matters I want to get out the way, which are important. You're all muted out there, ladies and gentlemen, and we can't see you, but hopefully you can see and hear us. But look, that's not to mean that you can sit back and relax for the evening. These are interactive webinars, and we do hope you will engage with us by asking us questions, and you can do that by using that Q&A icon. If you hover your mouse over that black bar, which is usually located at the bottom of people's screens, a box will open up and you can make your comment or ask your question via that facility. And myself and Owen will endeavour at this end then to take your questions and make sure they're fielded to the various presenters. We're recording this session, so look, if anybody has to nip off, or if you know someone that mightn't have been able to join tonight, it'll be up on the YouTube channel in the next few days. And equally, if you drop off, if you lose signal tonight and you want to rejoin, you can click that link that you used earlier on to join, and you'll be able to get back into the meeting. So lastly, IASIS points are important to people as well, and this event qualifies for a number of IASIS points. So what we'll do there, Owen is going to post a link in the chat function, the chat box, which again is down there at the bottom of the screen. And there'll be a link there where you can fill in your details and just post that, and we'll look after things after that. So that's where we're at. Before we go to our presentations, we have one final job, ladies and gentlemen, and that's where we want to ask you to maybe help us out. Owen is going to run a poll of about 4 questions, and hopefully this will, you know, it'll set the scene and tee things up for our 3 presenters. So Owen, can I ask you to do that?
Thanks, Andy. Yeah, so the poll should be live on everybody's screens there now. There's 4 questions, as Andy said. And I'll just read through them and you can select your answer as we go through. So question 1 is, how often are you forced to harvest a crop in less than ideal soil conditions? Every year, 1 year in 3, 1 year in 5 or more, or never? Question 2 is, in your experience, if headlands are badly damaged due to autumn-winter harvesting in poor conditions, how long does it take the soil to recover? 1 year, 3 years, more than 3 years, or they will never recover fully? Question 3 is, on what occasions do you examine the soil in different fields with a spade before carrying out field operations? Before subsoiling, before ploughing, before deep soil cultivations, other, or never? And the final question is simple. Would you ever consider parking up the plough? Never, maybe, or definitely? Now I'm just going to share the results up on the screen here. So it should be up on your screen now. So how often are you forced to harvest a crop in less than ideal soil conditions? A fairly substantial majority said every year. In your experience, if headlands are badly damaged due to autumn-winter harvesting in poor conditions, how long does it take the soil to recover? Fairly tight here. People said more than 3 years or 3 years. Fairly close there were the most popular answers. On what occasions do you examine the soil in different fields with a spade before carrying out field operations? It's fairly tight across a lot of these, really. Some said never. Some said other, mostly ploughing. And would you ever consider parking up the plough? And 53% of attendees said maybe. So it's something worth considering. So I'll stop sharing the results and I'll pass you back to Andy to introduce the first speaker.
Okay, thanks very much, Owen, and thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for participating in that. Yeah, it's always interesting, and I think it gives our presenters puts things in some context at least, and maybe they'll want to comment on those polls later on. So yeah, look, we'll go straight to get straight to business, and first up is our colleague from the Crops Research Institute in Oak Park in Carlow, Dr. Dermot Forristal. Dermot is a crops and mechanization researcher who's based there for more than 30 years with a lot of experience. His work includes soil cultivation and crop establishment for cereal crops, but he also works in soil cultivation and soil management. His recent research work would have included development and assessment of soil visual soil assessment techniques, the impact of compaction on cereal field headlands, and alternative establishment systems. I think you'll find that in the course of Dermot's presentation that he's a man that has a great love of tires. So Dermot, without any further ado, we look forward to your presentation. And if I could ask the other panelists maybe to mute and stop sharing or stop their cameras, we'll open the floor to Dermot.
Okay, thanks, Andy. Can you see my slides there?
Yes.
Yeah.
Can do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. So I'll bet ahead. So, okay. Thanks, Andy, for the introduction. I'm going to speak a bit about mechanization and cultivation, and I suppose its impact on soil structure. And I suppose just to say, first of all, what I certainly don't have experience in all my years, as Andy says, is really in the area of veg and heart. So you'll have to kind of bear with me for some of that. But
Dermot, if you see display settings, if you go into that and click on it and go duplicate, we'll see a full view of your presentation. We can just see the next slide, if you know what I mean.
You can see the next slide there, is it?
Just into the display settings and go to duplicate. Click on duplicate, yeah.
You got it there?
No, I knocked off this. Just share it again, Dermot. Yeah. Sorry now.
Hold on now. Are we there?
Lovely. Perfect.
You can see the full screen there now, yeah?
Yep, that's great.
Perfect.
That's perfect.
Okay, lads. So basically, yeah, just to talk then, I'm going to deal with mechanization and cultivation, I suppose, and the impact on soil structure. And if my slides will move now. Oh, I'm in trouble here, lads.
If you just click on it maybe on the screen, Dermot, might just let them move, yeah.
Okay, it might.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, so the soil structure, like if we talk about soil structure itself, what are we really talking about? And that's really the arrangement of the soil particles, and they're usually clumped together as aggregates. Now, aggregates can be very, very small, but they can also be quite, quite large, and they're the natural kind of structure that forms within soils. So it's really to do with the arrangement between those aggregates and the pore spaces between them, right? And those pore spaces, whether they're tiny, tiny micropores or macropores, they're hugely important in the way that the soil functions. So if we damage that structure, we usually are impacting hugely on that pore space within the soils, okay? So what does that do? Whether that damage comes from machinery or from traffic, what does the soil structure damage do? Normally, what you're talking about is creating compaction, right? Or some people will call it pans when it's beneath or a certain layer. And what that does is it reduces the pore space that we talked about there. That tends to directly impede root growth. And that'll affect all crops. But of course, in veg, if the product you're selling is a root, it'll certainly have a huge impact there because it'll impact on its quality as well as its yield. Compaction will also impede on water movement. So it's hugely important here. You tend to get lots of problems with water, both in terms of ponding and in terms of lack of availability to water when you want it. It, of course, restricts oxygen availability and any gas exchange in soils, again, if you have compaction. All this results in a reduced ability to uptake nutrients from plants. And that's really what can reduce your growth and yield. And in experiments or in trials, you can get up to 50% reduction in yield caused by compaction. Okay, where you still have a crop, but your yield could be reduced by 50%. Of course, one of the other downsides as well is that if you have compacted soils and dry conditions, it increases the power demand required to break up that soil in any way. So there's an increase there. But soil structure damage isn't only compaction. You can actually damage the aggregates or the soil in other ways by smearing or slaking or puddling when you're working in very severe conditions. Again, this sort of damage some of it is nearly irreversible. It was interesting to see that some of you picked there that the soils sometimes never recover. And that is true. If you do a lot of damage, you can be extremely difficult to recover. The other thing that we get from, and of course, the other thing as well is that we can actually damage drainage systems. This is separate from the soil structure itself, but we can physically damage drainage systems that are installed in fields as well. So we can cause that sort of damage as well by soil compaction. The other thing we get from research is that, prevention is better than cure, right? That we cannot expect to go in with subsoiling or deep loosening and to actually suddenly restructure our soil and get back to where we were. There is a role for it, but it's not by any means the full answer. So if you can at all, the approach has to be to try and avoid causing the damage in the first place. Okay. Just a quick one here, looking at different soils, and Mark Plunkett will go into a lot more of this later, but these are soils where we've used traffic treatments on. On the left-hand side, you can see a heavy soil, a controlled soil, and then where we had various traffic passes on it. And you can see the difference in terms of the aggregates there. You're making the aggregates really, really large and bulky and angular, if you like, in many ways. And again, in a lighter soil, you can see again the same thing. But Mark is going to go through this. I just said I'd show one there at this point. The other thing to say is that in cereal crops or whatever, compaction does impact on yield. This is some recent work we did looking at headlands. And I won't go through the different areas of headlands. There's 3 different areas there, but the red bar in each case, the red bar on the right-hand side is the infield yield. And then the other bars are different parts of the headland. And you can see this is a survey of about 40 different sites, 40 different fields across the country. And we can see that the yield reduction, if you like, in wheat can be averaged from the poorest part of the headland was only 40, with a yield reduction of 44%, spring barley 31%, winter barley 21% or 12%. But just to show you that it does certainly impact on yield, but that's from headland work. Okay, so what are the factors involved? What makes soils vulnerable, if you like, to damage? Because this is hugely important in terms of how you're going to try and manage soils. The soil type is certainly important. And certainly if you consider the organic matter of the soils, generally tillage soils tend to get depleted in organic matter over time. And if they're that little bit more susceptible to compaction because their aggregate formation isn't as good or as stable as soils that have a good organic matter. The presence or absence of vegetation is a huge difference. You will damage a soil when there's no vegetation there much quicker than if there is. Grass, for instance, is a vegetation that gives you that bit more strength or support. The next two are in red because they're hugely important, and that's the extent of cultivation and the soil moisture content. So the more you cultivate a soil, the weaker you make it and the more prone to damage it is. And that's both in terms of the intensity and the depth of cultivation. And then you interact then with soil moisture. Again, dry soils, really, truly dry soils aren't easily damaged. But if you wet them at all, they're much more easily damaged. That's hugely important. But outside of those, the machine weight that you use, the ground pressure that you exert will impact on the damage that you're going to cause. The traffic density, how many passes are there every 100 meters or whatever, is hugely important. And of course, if you're in an animal system, I just have that there as well, they're not immune to compaction as well. Animals can compact as well. So what's different about veg or hort production, right? I was just trying to think of this myself in the last day, that the first thing is that there's often very intensive cultivation. So you're often cultivating very deeply, depending on the type of crop you're trying to grow. You're often cultivating very intensively. There are multiple passes, often of power tools. You're nearly milling the soil in some cases. And the tool itself that you use, the speed of the tilling element, the forward speed of the tractor, all of those are adjusted often to give, great intensity in terms of your cultivation. Sometimes you certainly need that, but the more you do that, you are breaking down aggregates, right? That's what you're doing. And by breaking down the aggregates, yes, they may reform and restructure if they don't get damaged. But if you're traveling on that soil afterwards, or certainly when you're harvesting the crop, you're in great danger of doing much more damage compared to if you hadn't cultivated as intensively. So you have to think, do you need that? Destoning adds to the problems. By taking the stones out and putting them to one side, you certainly make the soil more inclined to slump and be damaged afterwards as well. Again, in veg and hort, you have a lot of traffic associated with the operations, again, depending on the crops that you're growing. And the weight of the machinery, the axle load, the tire pressures that you have are all hugely important. And we'll focus on that in a couple of minutes, or for a couple of minutes. Also, there tends to be in some crops lots of operations. You may be in the field a lot of times, traveling the same pathways on beds or spraying tram lines or whatever. So there's lots of operations. Many of the crops that you harvest are quite bulky, and there's lots of transport involved. And there's often a lot of transferring, maybe, whether it's boxes or transferring onto trailers or whatever on headlands. So headlands come in for a particular amount of traffic in that situation. The other thing, of course, that you have is that you often have, like all operations, but probably more so with veg, you often have problems with weather in terms of soil moisture and how it impacts on machinery operations. That can be at sowing or planting. It can be during the season, whether it's spraying, weeding, or doing some other operation. But in particular, it's to do with harvest, and particularly where you're harvesting for a fresh market. Okay, you don't often have the flexibility maybe in terms of harvest or whatever. And this really is a huge challenge. And this is where you risk a lot of permanent damage. And I would just throw out here, because I'm no expert in the area, but like I would imagine the contracts, as you know, are problematic in this area, right? That, in other words, those people that are buying your produce, they just want the produce on the supermarket shelf when they want it. But I would say, is there scope there in terms of, everybody wants to be associated with sustainability, okay? So soil management has to be part of that. And whether there's scope over the years to build up something there that gives people some sort of an out when conditions are really bad, that they don't take the choice that may permanently damage their field beyond all account, that there's some sort of way to prevent that from happening. But look, I don't know the business, but it's something I'd say from a soil point of view that should be considered, because the damage that's done sometimes can be permanent. So what can we do in terms of soil management? What can we do to try and stop that? Many of these things you do intuitively yourselves. To try and prevent the damage, you try and pick the most suitable soils. You all do that. You try and pick soils that have good drainage, good aspect, good ways of getting out of the field, things like that. Again, you all have to do that. The timing of operations is critical. If you could have flexibility in terms of harvest, I know the challenges that are there, but that would be the ideal. The other thing you can do, though, is you can look at wheels and tires and axle loads, and I'll come back to that in the next couple of slides. Another alternative is to look at alternative cultivation. Do we need to be cultivating as intensively for every crop in the heart or veg side of things, right? Can we reduce traffic or reduce tillage, the intensity of tillage? But that is crop dependent. But as you'll see, you're going to see how our next speaker, David, is going to have a look at that, or two talks on, to look at that in a particular situation, and there is scope there. Another alternative is what we call, I suppose, controlled traffic. That can be permanent controlled traffic tram or lines, or seasonal lines, which is simply really bed systems. Or you can look at particular headland management. I might mention that again towards the end. The other thing we have to look at is how we alleviate any damage that's caused. And to know, first of all, have you a problem? So you need to examine and dig for that, then to decide on what management you're going to have. And if it's subsoiling that you're thinking of, it's tricky, right? So we need to do that carefully. Again, I'll come back to that. So just to look quickly at axle loads, tires, and ground pressure. I always start this section with a slide like this because people look at the Ferguson 20. This is what you should be all moving back to. But people look at the Ferguson 20 and kind of say it's characterized by its small wheels, 4-inch by 19 in the front, 10 by 28 in the back. Okay, and you compare that with a modern tractor today, a mid-range John Deere tractor, 150 horsepower, right? The front wheels are many times the size of the back wheels in the Ferguson 20. Right? Back wheel is 20.8 by 38 as standard on that tractor, maybe a little bit bigger. And you think, God, we've moved a long way in terms of tires. The reality is, though, for its size and for its weight, the Ferguson 20, or for its weight and for its power, the Ferguson 20 had twice the size of tire as standard than that John Deere tractor has. Okay, so tires haven't kept pace. The Ferguson 20 was twice as well tired for its size, weight, if you like, and power compared to a modern tractor. So what can we do to reduce the load with tires? Okay, we can reduce the actual load. We can say we're going to work with smaller machines, but that rarely happens. But it's something to think of when you're considering the bigger one. It makes it harder to spread that load. Or we can reduce the ground pressure, right, by using bigger wheels or tires. And that's simply weight divided by the contact area. And we can physically measure that. Schematically, it's like this. You might have a 4-ton weight on a particular tire. That orange spot in the bottom there is the contact area. That may give you 2 bar ground pressure, right? That's just a ranking. If you double the tire size with the same weight, you have the ground pressure. You're down to 1 bar. But if you go back up to double the weight on that bigger tire, you're back up to the same ground pressure. But your contact area is bigger, so you're up to 2 bar ground pressure again. Okay. The interesting thing is that it's the air in a tire that supports the load. And if you inflate a tire correctly to the correct pressure for the load being carried, that inflation pressure, which you can get from load and inflation tables or from apps on the phone or whatever, which is the correct pressure for the load being carried by a particular tire, that gives you a very good guide to ground pressure, because we can go into all sorts of fancy models of soil stress and that. But basically that's all they'll come back to. That if you have big enough tires with a big volume that can carry a load at a low inflation pressure, it'll be a low ground pressure. So that's the whole basis of tire selection, which I'm going to show you about in a second, how to do that. Just to show you the impact, though, of that. If we have a 7-ton axle load, right, on a tractor, in this case, they're tractor tires, that's 3.5 ton per wheel, okay? If we had a 16.9 by 38, or the modern version of 420 85 by 38, that's 420 millimeters wide. The inflation pressure you'd need for that would be beyond what you should have in that tire, to be about 1.8 or 1.9 bar. I'm saying to you, that gives you an idea of the ground pressure that you're exerting. If you change that tire to a 650 65 by 38, which is a lot wider, you reduce that inflation pressure requirement for that load. Go into your tables, look at what inflation pressure you need. It's 1 bar for that tire because it's a bigger air volume, all right? Let's move on, though, a little bit from that. There's new technology in tires, which allows more deflection of the carcass. So this effectively lets you run the tire at a lower pressure, even though it's the same size, okay? And that lengthens the contact patch, and that does reduce the ground pressure. So if you have an IF designated tire, right? Michelin were the first with this about 12 or 15 years ago, but all manufacturers have this technology now. That'll bring you down to about 0.85 or 0.9 bar for that same load. If you have a VF tire, which is even more deflection. It brings it down to 0.7 bar. Okay, so that's the concept of tire size and tire technology and what it can do for you in terms of ground pressure. Axle load, though, is important. These two situations on the slide there are both the same ground pressure. 2 ton on a small tire, 4 ton on a big tire. Both tires will sink the same distance in a soft soil. But the bigger tire, because it's constraining more soil, actually the pressure bulbs from that down in the soil, they don't get bigger, the values are the same, but they transmit deeper into the soil. So if you're using bigger and bigger machinery, whether it's a harvester, trailer, whatever, not alone should you try to get to a low ground pressure, but you should go even lower than you would with a smaller weight. Okay. So what ground pressure do you need? I want to move on quickly. The one to pick out here is that it depends on the conditions, right? But if you look at the second category there, working on cultivated soils, because that's what you were mainly working on, okay? So if you're working on cultivated soils, you want tires big enough, ideally, that are able to carry the load between 0.5 and 0.8 bar. If you're plowing, if you're working on stubble, you'd allow it up to maybe 1 bar. Okay, so that just gives you a kind of context. What does that mean in practice? Just to move on to an example, slide won't move. Yeah, here we are. Okay, so this is a 3 meter one pass. Okay, serial drill, power harrow on a 100 kilowatt tractor, 135, 140 horsepower tractor. On the headland, when that's lifted, you have an 8 ton axle load. Okay, so what are your tire options on that? As single tires, right? And we're rating at 30 kilometers for road use afterwards. A 520 85 by 38 would require 1.6 bar. Okay, that's a 20.8 by 38 in old terms. 665 by 38, 1.5. 650 65 by 38, 1.3. Remember, we're trying to get down to less than 0.8 of a bar for working on cultivated soils. The VF version of that tire, the 650 65 by 38, big improvement, down to 0.9. But to get below 0.8 bar, you want a VF 710 70 by 38. That tire is going to cost a lot of money. But for this sort of equipment, if you want to get down to that sort of pressure, that's what you need. Okay. One other example, and I'll move on from these then. This is the 6 meter version of that. Big 250 horsepower tractor, 6 meter unit on the back, seed hopper on the front. Your axle load is 12 ton. I won't dwell on the tires, just to say the only one, look at the width of those tires, 710, 900, 1050 millimeters wide. Right, I don't see anyone working those. You wouldn't want to be on the road, but they're still only getting you down to 1.4 bar. That last option, 710 70 by 42, with a D after it, it's a dual wheels, right? But again, just showing you what extremes you need to go with heavy weights to get the ground pressure down. Okay, I'll skip this one. We need to move on. Same story with trailers. Okay, 14 ton, 5 ton trailer with a 14 ton load. It's going to have about 4 ton on each of its tires at the back. Okay, your standard super singles are 3 and 4 bar. Your kind of wide option, the third option there, is what they call the low ground pressure option for those 560 40 by 22.5. It'll fit in the same space. It's much wider, but it's only getting you down to 2.8 bar. For a trailer, you'd like to be below 1.5 bar when you're working on in the conditions that you guys might do in the late autumn or early winter. Even moving to 650 by 22.5s, 655 26.5s, which require a different trailer. They're huge tires, but you need to go an awful lot if you're trying to get down to that sort of pressure, those sort of pressures. So it's not an easy task. Okay, to move on from tires to soil cultivation very quickly, right? If we look at conventional tillage, it's deep. We're inverting the soil. You know, normally set for cereals now, I'm just showing you this secondary tillage is power harrow. Worked fairly shallow, to be honest, for seeding after that. Minimum tillage is typically shallow, right? In its true form, you're only tilling maybe 3 to 4 inches deep, but many in Ireland would till a good bit deeper than that. But one of the benefits of that is that you don't weaken the soil as much. So what are you doing when you're cultivating? You're facilitating seed or plant placement to get to the right depth and the right spacing. You're providing soil conditions for plant growth. Seed to soil contact, the right aggregate size or pore space, the right density. You're often exposing the soil to dry it, but you still want to pack it a little bit to retain moisture. You want to drain excess water. And you're doing it for weed control reasons as well. But the downside is what I said earlier. You're breaking down aggregates, you're weakening the soil, you're making it very easily damaged. And the depth and intensity, as you increase those, you're increasing the risk. But finding alternatives is challenging for hort and veg. There's no doubt about that. What you can do, you know, if you had less intensive cultivation, you will increase soil strength and bearing capacity. So in a cereal situation, if you have a min-till or direct drill, the trafficability point, now there's a lot of challenges with these systems, a lot, don't get me wrong, but the trafficability is much better. But, you know, they're really you know, for fast development of annual crops, they can be challenging. They may not be suitable for roots, where root is your end product. And it's unrealistic to try, as you're trying to do with cereal direct drilling, to try and build up a permanent structure for permanent soil structure that develops over time. That's the ultimate with direct drilling. You're trying to leave the soil alone, that it develops its own vertical porosity. But for annual veg crops, that's probably unrealistic. The one option that's there that you're going to hear more about in the last talk is strip tillage, right? In this case, you're tilling a strip of soil where your plants are going to do their main root development. And that piece you're tilling to a certain depth, whatever depth you want to, if you like. But you leave the areas adjacent to that relatively untilled. And that doesn't weaken the whole structure. So there is probably benefit from that from a veg point of view. But as I say, I don't know much about that, but it could be a good compromise for some crops. And as I say, you'll hear a lot more practical information. This is a strip till setup that we use in cereal plots, a Missouri drill. But you can see every 330 millimeters of width, every 330 millimeters wide, there's a tine. And then the seed is, if you like, spread in a band on top of that. But between that is relatively undisturbed. Okay. Finally, I just mentioned a couple of things about controlled traffic, right? The idea is, I suppose, having permanent pathways within fields, right? And this is used in conventional agriculture for cereals, can be used, you know, some people in the UK, some on the continent, some in Australia are using systems like this, where they're trying to have large areas of the field that never have traffic, okay? It's invariably with min-till, it's not with a plough-based system. But there's another version which is called seasonal control traffic, which really is a bed system, which you're quite familiar with. In other words, once you form the beds, there's no other traffic that goes on that, right? So the concepts, you know, can we adopt them for hort or veg? I'm not going to say much more, but look, it's worth thinking about. The other options are to try and, you know, manually control traffic in terms of the field and headlands, to plan out your fields as well as possible, so that the headlands and turning area, maybe they're not cropped at all. Maybe they should deliberately have some bit of grass or something that will support you well and things like that. But look, as I say, you probably know a lot more about that than I do. And this is just showing you the concepts of controlled traffic, where you have kind of machines that are multiples of others. So you have certain lines that carry all of the traffic and others that may carry just the cultivation traffic. But those lines are actually in a cereal situation, they are fixed in the field with an RTK GPS, so that the areas that are not trafficked never receive traffic, and those that are trafficked receive it every year. And they, if you like, build up more strength. Okay, obviously in the wheelings you're not going to get as much crop, but they have good strength for supporting the machines, and the other areas are untrafficked, if you like. Finally, I just deal 2 minutes with alleviating problems, because I know I'm going over the time. In other words, if you have a problem. And like straight away, we kind of think of deep loosening. In other words, do we go in and loosen that soil? It can be a deep grubber or something like that, or a full subsoiler with winged legs that can go very deep, like the one in the picture here, okay? All I would say is that the first thing to think of, I would always say, when you're subsoiling, is how you're going to manage it after loosening it, okay? So to plan immediately, because when you subsoil, you may indeed alleviate some of the problems, but you might actually create others. In other words, when you loosen that soil and you loosen it to a depth, in some ways, you're going to let the moisture down through that depth. Some ways a pan can protect the soil underneath. So when you take that pan away, which might be a good thing, but you need to make sure you don't recompact again, because you can actually recompact deeper. So the critical thing is to only use it if needed, right? Mark was going to talk to him about that. You need to examine your soil, right? Only ever consider subsoiling in dry conditions, okay? Because otherwise, even though you might let water off by subsoiling in moist or wet conditions, you will do an awful lot of smearing and damage in the process, and you will not do the main thing which subsoiling should do, which is to break up a compacted layer when it's dry. You need to use it at the correct depth, and that's as shallow as you'll get away with, okay? And you need the correct spacing between the legs to make sure that you get an even lift across that. So the spacing between the legs depends on whether there's wings on the legs and depends on the depth that you're going. There is a very real recompaction risk, as I said at the beginning. If you actually loosen the soil, you make it prone to recompaction. So you need to be very gentle on that soil after subsoiling. And if you end up damaging a headland and subsoiling that, well, then don't turn on that headland again. You either set up the headlands on the other side of the field for the seasons following it, or indeed you set a false headland inside of that to avoid turning on that area again. So be very careful about transferring problems deeper into the profile by recompacting. That's a huge problem. And never ever subsoil in wet or when the soil is plastic, if you like. You have to be patient, okay? So in summary, I would say, or to conclude, that you need to adapt a soil management approach to try and prevent damage. A lot of these things you all do. You pick suitable soils and sites. Avoid, where possible, the need to work in wet conditions, but that's easier said than done. Suitable machinery, tires, and ground pressure can play a role, but they will not solve those extreme situations, okay? Consider reducing cultivation where it's not needed, and you'll hear some practical applications of that later on. Try and control traffic and only subsoil if necessary. And I would say finally, try and get all stakeholders in the long term to support soil protection. In other words, those who you're supplying product to, if they're supposed to be marketing sustainable produce, well, then they have to support systems that will have sustainable soil management as part of that. So that's it, Andy.
Dermot, thanks very, very much. And absolutely a very, very solid overview of the whole business of cultivation machinery. I wasn't joking when I said earlier on you were fond of tires, and that certainly came through in your presentation. But look, a hell of a lot of solid information there. Appreciate that. We're watching the clock, Dermot. There has been one or two questions, but I think what we'll do, we'll go straight to Mark if that's okay, and we'll address the questions maybe towards the end. So could I just introduce Mark Plunkett, ladies and gentlemen. Mark is our colleague in the Soil and Plant Nutrition department. He's a specialist based in Johnstown Castle in Wexford. He's the editor of the infamous Teagasc Green Book, which a lot of people will be familiar with. It's the major and micronutrient advice for agricultural soils. And it also contains those horticultural recommendations, which he keeps a close eye on. Mark supports all Teagasc advisors on a daily basis, particularly on the grassland and tillage front, in terms of delivery of a crop nutrient plan and advice to the client base. So look, Mark is going to give us a bit of detail on the whole soil structure business. And like I say, ladies and gentlemen, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A box down at the end and send them to us, and we'll field them after the presentations. Thanks very much. I think you're on mute there, Mark.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks, Andy, for the very nice introduction. And this evening, I suppose I'm going to lead on from Dermot's presentation in, I suppose, looking under the soil and assessing soil structure. And I suppose I would like to give you a number of I suppose, tips or things to look for when you actually do the dig or when you take out the spade. And I was delighted to see on the survey the question that Owen put up there, that a lot of people, or there was a third of people taking out the spade on occasion, whether it was subsoiling, ploughing, or cultivating soils deeply. So as I say, what I'm going to focus on is the whole area of, what to look for when you dig into a soil or when you take out the spade and go around to different parts of the field, what to look for, or what are the key characteristics. And I suppose just to build on what Dermot said, like, soil structure is very, very important. It holds up machinery. It supplies, I suppose if to think about structure is a bit like a house. You have different rooms in the house, and the soil is the very, very same. That you're trying to, that the soil has many functions in terms of supplying air, water, and mineral matter, and they all come together to create an environment for plants to thrive, and grow and develop. The soil is supplying nutrients, soils to warm up quickly. We want healthy crops, and also, soil drainage. That's a very, very important function as well. That we have a healthy soil. We have a good structure. We have earthworms, and they function in providing a healthy environment for plants to grow and to have a good supply of nutrients. So, what I'm going to do with you here this evening is that in Teagasc, there has been a lot of work done around soil structure over the last number of years, and Dermot and my colleagues in Johnstown Castle have developed different soil assessment techniques for both grassland and tillage and horticultural soils. So what I am going to look at here this evening with you, it's a visual soil assessment technique. It's called the double spade. So again, it involves digging a pit in the soil. And again, there's a few little tools that are useful when you go out into the field. Number one, obviously, is a spade. A measuring tape is also very, very useful. And also a small trowel, or what I find very, very useful, is a small garden fork. So when you do your dig or open up your soil, when you're assessing that soil, the trowel or the garden fork can be very, very useful. It's also important to identify areas in the field to assess soil structure. And again, I would encourage you to go to a good and a bad area, maybe a headland that was damaged, and then go out in the field to a good area, and maybe start in the good area to see, what is the soil like in the good part of the field. And like Dermot showed us some results there that, in winter wheat, there's something like a 44% yield reduction in the headland compared to out in the field. So I think that's a good place maybe to get your eye in on what to see, what's good and what's bad. Okay, so what does the double spade involve? So again, it involves in digging a pit, or taking out a section of soil about 1/2 meter long. Okay, about 20 inches you're digging out of soil, and about 12, 14 inches wide, and we're going down 1/2 meter. So we're taking out the top 1/2 meter of soil, and that's what we're going to be assessing. So, the first area that we're going to look at is the top, let's call it the plough layer, the top maybe 20, 25 centimeters, and then we look at the next 20 or 25 centimeters. So we're examining the top 1/2 meter of soil, and we're looking at, I suppose, the layering or the visual or the physical characteristics in that soil. And we're looking for things like Dermot talked about in terms of, a compacted layer, like where is that compacted layer? But also, what I would like to share with you here this evening is, other things that we can look at in terms of the aggregates. And aggregates is, it's the soil particles that come together, and how well, or what's the shape, or how easily are they're broken. So the shape, the strength, the porosity, and another indicator as well is the abundance of roots. So again, we're very much examining the different soil layers to help identify whether the soil is good, medium, or poor quality. Okay, and again, it's recommended to repeat this 5 times across the field. Okay, so again, I'll move on. So again, when you take out your soil, you can either take out the top 20 or 25 centimeters on the spade, and that's the plough layer, or layer 1 that we're looking at here, okay, in the diagram there. So again, things like aggregate size. So again, you're looking in the plough layer, again, in terms of what's the shape and size of those aggregates. So again, in terms of good quality, we're looking at rounded, small, crummy, rounded aggregates. Again, if the quality is sort of moderate or in between, they'll be larger aggregates there. And where there's poor quality, then you'll have a lot of these sort of clods or large, bulky aggregates in that top layer. So again, by even just digging that soil, you'll know, and once you take out that layer of soil, you'll know very, very quickly what the quality is like. Also, aggregate shape. So again, in terms of good quality, we're looking for those nice rounded aggregates, that are stable in the soil. And again, not too big. So again, you can see where your moderate quality, they're getting larger, and then poor quality, you're sort of getting this angular blocky. So again, you're getting faces on the aggregates, and they'll fit back together. When you break them open, they'll actually fit back together in, they'll actually go back together, and they'll have flat, smooth faces, and that's not a good sign. Another thing is aggregate strength. So again, when you take out that top layer, again, how easily do the aggregates break between your finger? So again, you can see here, they're easy they crumble or they break up easily between your finger and your thumb. Again, moderately, they don't break as easily. And then where there's poor quality, again, they're quite difficult to break in your hand. Okay, so they're just, I suppose, some of the telltale signs. And again, you'll know very, very quickly, as you dig that soil as regards to quality in terms of the soil structure. Okay, another area is aggregate porosity. Okay, so again, by visually looking at it, can you see cracks or earthworm holes? Is there porosity? Can air and water move in the soil quite easily? So again, in terms of good quality, again, you can see that there's there's plenty of earthworm holes there. Moderate quality, again, it's getting that bit more dense, or there's not as many cracks or earthworm holes. And then where there's poor quality, it's quite dense. There's little earthworm activity, little air movement, or water movement. Another very good indicator for me is root activity. Again, you're going to get the majority of roots in the plough layer, but again, for me, they are a very good indicator. So when you examine the face of the wall of the pit that you've dug out, you'll see the more root activity you see in that soil, the better. So again, you can see in terms of good quality, there's plenty of root activity, and poor quality or moderate, not as good. And I suppose a characteristic of a compacted soil, you'll often see the roots actually going down in the earthworm holes, or you'll see a lot of roots, where soils are very, very tight or very, very dense. Another good indicator, folks, is soil color and smell. So again, is there a healthy smell of the soil, and also color? So again, this nice brown color, again, you'll know straight away when you take out that top 20 or 25 centimeters by the color of the soil in terms of the health, or is there earthworm activity? Is there small bugs in the soil? And again, if you're getting this gray or this mottling color, again, it's a sign of compacted soils or anaerobic conditions, or maybe poor drainage, or maybe water lying due to a compacted layer. Okay, so again, by examining the face, with your trowel or your small garden fork, even by just dabbing the fork into the face, you'll see, is there a tight layer? Like, between the plough layer and the top of the next, say, 20 or 25 centimeters, we'll often get a plough pan or a tightening. And again, it's important to examine that in terms of, root activity and soil structure. So that's the plough layer, or the top 20 or 25 centimeters, in terms of assessing soil structure and soil health. In terms of I'm calling it the subsoil, or maybe the top of the subsoil here. So again, it's 25 centimeters down to 50 centimeters. So it's the next 25 centimeters. And, where you are preparing ground for, say, potatoes, and cultivating quite deep in terms of ridging and bed tilling, and after those crops, maybe where there's a difficult harvest, we can get a compacted layer in this zone here. So again, you're doing the very, very same thing. You can take out a spade full, you can take out your 25 centimeters on the spade, or you can examine the face of the pit or the wall of the pit that you've opened up. So again, you're looking very much to aggregate size. In this zone here, like, the soil will be tighter, and you may see more of the larger soil aggregates compared to the finer, or the more smaller aggregates that you will find in your plough layer. Also, the aggregate shape. So again, if there's a compacted layer in this zone here, again, you're probably going to see more of these angular blocky type aggregates in that zone. Or if there's a compacted layer there, you will very easily identify where that layer is and at what depth is at as well. And also, again, by examining the strength or how easy do the aggregates break, that will give you a very good indication as to whether there is a problem there in terms of soil compaction. Also, aggregate porosity. Again, I think examining the face, or this zone here in terms of, like, you will see earthworm holes or earthworm activity, and also root activity. And also, again, if you're getting this poor quality, where the structure is quite poor, or maybe it'll be a different color, maybe due to anaerobic conditions or waterlogging, again, you will see that in this zone as well. I think for me, rooting, again, as I said to you before, following the roots down in that top half meter of soil. For me, it's probably one of the best indicators that if you're getting root activity, in your top half meter of soil or into the next, 25 to 50 centimeters, that's a very good indicator that that soil structure is good. Like if there's a pan or a compacted layer here, like the roots will be traveling, horizontally along that pan and then trying to find their way down through cracks or through earthworm holes. So I say rooting or following those roots down with your garden fork down along, and I suppose working that face, it's a very good indicator in terms of whether there's a soil structure problem there or not. And then again, color. So again, color and smell. Obviously the color will change, as you go down. You'll have less organic matter, you'll have more of a subsoil, so you may see a color change depending on the soil type. And again, if you're getting, say, a poor smell or anaerobic conditions, again, is an indication that there is some restriction or some barrier there to both air and water movement. So I suppose this is what I'm trying to get across here this evening, is that when you take out the spade, what are the telltale signs? Like, earthworm activity, roots, color, smell, the size and the shape of the aggregates. They'll all tell you very, very quickly, where you lie in terms of soil structure and soil quality. So I said the main aim, I suppose, is that we see, is there a layer of tightness or compaction, and where is it? Is it shallow? Is it in the top, 20, 25 centimeters? Often characteristic maybe of min-till or direct drill systems, that you'll see this compacted layer or zone, higher up in the plough layer or in that top 20 or 25 centimeters. And again, like there may be no issue here, like, there may be a little bit of tightening, but again, roots may be getting through and compaction may not be a problem. This is, I suppose, it's just another example of a plough-based system, and again, a lovely plough pan there. You can see that there is a good plough pan there, that has formed over a number of years. In terms of improving soil structure or soil health, look, really, I suppose, number one, feeding the biology or putting an organic matter source or a food source into the soil will definitely improve both the aggregate stability, the soil's ability to carry weight. Like, really, you're adding the glue to bring the mineral matter together as in sand, silt and clay, and then to form that structure or that network, in terms of air and water movement and root activity. So organic manures, and generally the likes of farmyard manure, mushroom compost, poultry manures, they tend to supply a lot of carbon or a lot of organic matter, and they're an excellent food source. And you will see it, like I can recall one of our farmers who applied a lot of organic manures over a long number of years. Like, the fields were drier, there was way more earthworm activity, and the soils were healthier and very, very consistent yields as well. Also, things like cover crops. Again, there's a big benefit there of getting a cover crop in after that'd be a vegetable crop or a cereal crop, as part of a rotation, that you're putting, again, you're putting an active plant with a root system into the soil. That's again going to encourage, soil health, soil drainage, soil structure, and also adding some carbon back into the soil as well. And also they act as a protection over the winter period from, very intensive rain. So, there is a range of cover crops there. And in my book, like keeping an active crop there probably 365 days of the year, not always possible, but is beneficial in terms of protecting soil and improving soil structure and soil health. In terms of soil quality information, I suppose, just to direct you, we have in Teagasc on the Teagasc website, we have the soil and soil fertility website. There's 4 videos there recently produced. David Wall talks about soil compaction. Julie Bondi again goes through what I've gone through, the double spade. Dermot Forristal talks about machinery and equipment. And Patrick Forristal again looks at cover crops and the role they play in terms of stabilizing soil structure. We also have recently produced the soil structure ABC, so it's a guide. It's what I've actually done with you here this evening, that is available on the website there as well. And again, I would encourage you to go in and have a look at that. It'll give you a little bit more detail around the different methods for assessing soil structure. So that's it for me, Andy. I've probably gone through that pretty quickly. Not sure how we're going for time.
We're bang on, Mark, and I think it was worth a while you spending a bit of time on going through the whole process of soil assessment, because it is extremely important, and I think you covered that out very, very well. So thanks for that, and thanks also for mentioning the resources there at the end. Could I just say, ladies and gentlemen, all our presenters are happy for their slides and their notes, I think, to be shared on the Teagasc website, if that's okay. So you'll be able to access those in the next few days. We have a couple of questions, Mark, but to be honest with you, I think we'll just keep going, and we'll finish out our presentations, and then we can have a bit of a panel discussion. So that brings me to our final presentation tonight. Is actually in the form of a video YouTube clip, which is David Thomas's contribution. David is our guest tonight from the UK, from West Cornwall, and David, just to give you a quick background, would have grown up in a traditional Cornish farm family where they grew early potatoes, winter cauliflower, and spring cabbage, which are still grown by a lot of families in that part of the world. But after spending a bit of time on the ornamental side of the house with Winchester growers on the daffodil front, David was drawn back to the vegetable side of the house, and he spent 5 years with Southern Farms in the UK before he moved to Riveira Produce, where he is now and has been farm manager and agronomist there for the past 10-11 years. They're big growers. They've over 6,000 acres of vegetable crops, primarily brassicas. But David and his colleagues there have been spearheading this whole business of strip tilling, which they're integrating into their cropping programs. And the climate and soils are quite similar to a lot of what we have over here. And I think you'll be very, very interested, ladies and gentlemen, to hear what David has to say in this clip. So no, without any more to say, I'm going to ask Owen, would you just run that, Owen? And then what we'll do is we'll open it up to discussion afterwards.
Yep, thanks, Andy. I'll just share this video now. So it should be on your screen there now.
See, we're Riveira Produce. We're farming several acres, well, over 6,500 acres in West Cornwall. The main crop we're growing are brassicas, which range from cauliflower, calabrese, spring greens, pointed cabbage, savoys, and so on. strip tiller is a single leg with a foot on the bottom, and there's a disc each side of it, and it simply drags through the soil and bubbles up the soil in that strip, which then breaks it down good enough to plant in. There's no power drive, there's no, so a tractor can be ticking over and pulling it. At a bit of speed, the faster you can go, better the tilth. All you're doing is cultivating the one strip you need to put your plant in. He's down at sort of 8 inches, 9 inches, so there's, the root of the plant will go straight down, and as it's going down, we found it goes out sideways in between the layers in the soil. It will find the layers in the soil and go sideways as well. So you are using all of the field, even though you think you're just using the one slot. What we're finding with the strip tiller is better soil drainage, more even crops, because every plant has got the same chance, and we're finding that we aren't getting harvesting rigs stuck on this sort of ground, because it's more the ground's more consolidated and holds up all the machinery, so we're not causing compaction and ruts, or so we think, and generally a lot happier with the crop behind it. It's actually faster overall because we haven't had to plough the ground. There is a diesel saving, we haven't worked it out exactly, but we know it's cheaper. And in catchy weather, if you're working in showers, you haven't got to touch the ground until you need it.
When you plough a field, you lose moisture. And by not disturbing the soil and planting much more minimum tillage, we're retaining the soil moisture and the soil structure, and that gives us a more even crop. This particular field was in summer cauliflower, so we harvested cauliflower off this field in July, and then first week of August, when the crop was finished, it was lightly dissed over. We lightly dissed in the cover crop of Phacelia, linseed and clover. We've been doing this for 2 or 3 years now, and we've noticed a great improvement in the soil structure and the amount of wildlife, such as worms and all the stuff you can't see. So that the soil health is definitely improving through this practice.
First shovelful, you see more worms. So they're all busy, all being protected by the cover crop above them. And, some lovely crumbly free soil there. This particular field, it'll be left here for most of the winter. It'll maintain a little bit of green in the winter months in Cornwall because we're milder. And then in the spring, this will probably be planted in cauliflower again. So that we've actually stopped ploughing land now. This will be just dissed off lightly, and then we've got a Vanderstack crosscut machine, which will be run over it, which will destroy. It will break all the dead material into short pieces of debris, and then we run a strip tiller through it and start planting behind the strip tiller. There's a few issues. If you've got too good a cover crop, planting the following crop can be an issue, but we're getting better at that. We get to a certain stage, and it all depends which time of the year you're targeting. We start planting in early March, and we finish planting in October. So, each cover crop's got to be sort of tailored to suit what's being planted behind it. Destroying the the cover crop at the right time is key. We are seeing an impact on the following crop. They're tending to get more even now, more healthy. They're a lot happier crops, basically. Like I've been saying, we've changed lots of things over the last few years. We're cover cropping, which is bringing in beneficials. We're strip tilling ground, which is improving the structure and bringing the worms back. We aren't getting it all right. I don't think we ever will get everything perfect, but if you're thinking about going down this route, don't be afraid to try it, and don't stick with we've always done it like this. We're not going to change.
Okay, that's great. Thanks very much for that. Some really good words of encouragement there from David. And David, we appreciate that. Could I ask maybe both Dermot and David maybe to switch on their cameras, and we can address some of the questions that have come through from our audience. And just to say that if there is, now that we've completed our presentations, if anyone else has any questions, now's the time to put them in that question and answer box, which is through that facility down at the bottom of your screen. Just open up that box, and we'll make sure, myself and Owen are looking at them here, and we'll make sure that they're going to be addressed by our presenters. Owen, can I ask you maybe there to perhaps start off with the couple of questions for Mark, perhaps?
Yeah. Question here from Mark to begin with. If you were to consider draining some well-tilled ground, what are the most important aspects of a new drainage plan, and how do you avoid doing more damage? Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Owen. I suppose you're draining to remove water or to improve the trafficability of soils. I suppose it'd be important to identify parts of a field that may merit in putting drains in, because it is quite costly. It is a quite costly exercise, but yes, I suppose it's very much assessing fields and identifying areas that may benefit or merit from putting in drains, or maybe even maintaining drains. Like there may be old drainage systems in there in terms of box shores, or or maybe even deepening, maybe surrounding field drains. There may be benefits, but I think it's very much on a field by field basis on.
Okay, thanks, Mark. One here for Dermot, maybe. Have you carried out any compaction analysis between tractor tires and tracks on a tractor? And it's been pointed out as well that a lot of vegetable harvesters are on tracks now. So have you any comment on that, if Dermot is?
Yeah. I can't seem to get my video back on there, lads.
Yeah.
But anyhow, you can do it without looking at me. Tracks, listen, look, tracks are a very good way of getting ground pressure down, okay, and a very good way of doing it without increasing the overall width of the machine. So you see them used on harvesters, as said there, you see them even used on combines, and the whole principle, or the reason they're used on combines, is to stop, if you try to get the same contact area with a tire, you'd have a hugely wide machine. So tracks are very effective at getting the ground pressure down. Where they're poor, I suppose, in some cases, is in very greasy or wet conditions. The traction from tracks can be quite poor. Even their steering ability on tractors can be poor in those sorts of situations. Also on headlands, if you're talking about tractors on headlands with 3-point linkages and that, you can actually have quite a bit of zones underneath the tracks that when you lift an implement on the headland can actually have higher pressures than maybe the equivalent tractor on tires. But in general, tracks are used to get lower ground pressure. They can do that. But again, in very greasy conditions, the traction from them can be poor if they're used as a traction source.
Great. Thanks for that, Dermot. There is just another one I might fire at you here while it's on the screen. From your own experience, do you think subsoiling is better for soil compared to using a spading machine?
Yeah, well, I have to say I'm not that familiar with a spading machine as such. But I do think as subsoilers can, what they can do is they can work if you have the conditions for them to work. So the typical scenarios, I mean, Mark showed good pictures there of pans beneath the working area. So if you have a very, very tight pan that you reckon is impeding drainage, impeding root growth and so on, you need a tool to get down there to break that up. And a winged subsoiler leg in that context is quite efficient, okay? What I would say though is 3 things. One is be prepared to manage it gently afterwards, because by taking out that pan, you're letting more moisture down. If you go back in that soil in wet conditions, you're in danger of recompacting to a greater depth. The other thing is only go to the depth that you need to go, and only go in very, very dry conditions, because you need to get the shatter. It's not just a matter of drawing a leg through it. You want to get it to actually shatter that soil and not just smear it.
Okay, very good. I'm going to bring David in here for one. David, there's a question here on this strip tilling business. Is the strip tiller run separately to the transplanter, or do you have an adapted transplanter? And if not, are you running the separate machines on an RTK system to match up?
Yeah, the strip tillers run separate to the planter. We run all the strip tillers on RTK, so it should be within 2.5 centimeters, I believe, and the planters are running on either FS3 or Center Point, which is the next level down from RTK, which is good enough. It's good enough.
Okay. And another one following on is, what is the best method of field preparation, leveling, etc., before you first season up with a strip tiller? Before your first season with a strip tiller?
Yeah, you need a level field. The flatter it is, the better. If it's really uneven, we'll put a big Simba type disc over it first, and then follow it in with a Vaderstat machine, which is a bit there's more finesse with the Vaderstat. It does a nice level job. Sometimes you might have to drag a light ripper over it to level it out. But once you get that level start to plant on, put the strip tiller in, it's fine, basically.
Okay. And do you worry about trash, we'll say, in terms of carryover of disease, David, with the tight rotations on brassicas?
Yes, not quite sure on this one. I've got a bit of a theory that when we plough trash under, we're actually looking after it better than we think.
Right.
If you leave it on top of the surface and let the elements get at it, the weather, the sun, the UV, I really think you're doing a better job by leaving it on the top and letting everything have a go at it rather than ploughing it under.
That's interesting.
That's a personal theory, but we've seen it. We've seen where we've ploughed. When we in the early days, same variety, same farm.
Okay.
The crops are cleaner on the strip tilling, basically.
Okay. Oh, and there's one or two there on cover crops. Would you maybe field those? There's one for Mark on manures.
Yeah, Mark, there's one here. Which form of organic matter do you think works best for structure? I.e. well composted farmyard manure or mushroom compost?
Yeah, Owen, they're probably top of the pile in terms of getting an amount of organic matter in farmyard manure. Any of the high dry matter manures, farmyard manure, mushroom compost, they tend to be a lot better than the liquid manures because it's down to the volume of organic matter or the amount of carbon. Like if you take, say, 25 tons of farmyard manure, you're adding about 2.5 tons of carbon per hectare. If you take mushroom compost, that's somewhere around 20 tons per hectare, again about 2.6 tons of carbon. So any of the farmyard manures, any of those composts, they are definitely the best in terms of trying to build or feed soil organic matter or feed the biology there. Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. And just a question here, a quick one. How much a hectare for cover crops, either to Mark or David maybe as well, either you there?
Yeah, look, I can range anywhere. It depends on how you establish them. Like it doesn't take a lot to get a cover crop established. It's generally a run of a stubble rubber, spread out your seeds and roll it. And then I suppose it depends on the mix. You know what I mean? You can spend anywhere from probably some 5-10 euros an acre up to maybe 25-30 euros an acre, depending on the mix. If you go for your legumes or your phacelias or your radishes, like your forage drapes and your stubble turnips tend to be a cheap mix. But if you want to have diversity in there, or even oats, I find are a good mix in there as well. Like really you're trying to get a cover and help soil structure. David, you probably have experiences in with cover crops there as well.
Yeah, we tend to use a lot of Phacelia. Well, we've tried oats. It's brilliant at the soil structure and breaking it up, but planting after oats is difficult. Phacelia is brilliant. The clovers. As you say, price range, it can be anything from 10 to 50 pounds a acre. It's quite a range. It all depends what you go for. Establishment, it's a simple. We just got a little cedar on top of one of the Vaderstats. It's you're going to chop up your previous crop anyway. So the extra cost there is just the cost of the cedar and the seed, basically.
Okay, thanks for that, guys. We have time for a couple of more, I think. One of the questions here was, we'll ask David this one. It's from the video clip, David. What was sown as a cover crop after the early summer cauliflowers in the video? This attendee has very light sandy soils, and what would you recommend?
That was a Phacelia, clover, and there's a bit of linseed mix in there. The Phacelia does cope fairly well. You need a bit of moisture there if you're on a light sandy soil. But Phacelia, it grows very well, very well.
Okay.
I think we've got sand, and we grow Phacelia on it quite successfully.
Okay, very good. Are you noticing any reduction in club root affecting your brassicas since using cover crops?
I don't think the cover crops would help with club root. We do maintain a high pH, basically.
Right.
Certainly the structure's better, and I think that might help with because club root is triggered by a problem basically, and that can be compaction basically.
Okay. And final one, I think we'll just we'll address this to our David again. Does the strip till work equally well in all soil types?
We've not found anything it won't work in yet.
Okay.
Some of the timing wise, the heavy clays, you've got to treat them with respect and get your timing right. But it's the combination of the cover crop and the strip till is key. The cover crop in between does a lot of work.
Okay. Look, unless Owen, you have any other questions there, I think we're kind of gone over time a little bit, and whilst there is a few questions that we haven't, there are other topics. What we'll do is we'll ask our presenters maybe to address those questions after tonight, and we'll put the question or the answers to those questions up on the website one of the days next week, if everybody's in agreement to that. So look, without holding you any longer, could I maybe draw things to a close? I want to thank everybody who has been involved tonight, particularly our presenters. Thanks to Dermot and Mark and David, and thanks to you people out there as well for being so interactive and asking questions. That's always very, very important to us. It's your meeting after all, and I think it's what makes it for everybody. So we appreciate your participation in that. Could I just remind you again, for anybody that's trying to avail of the IASIS points, the link was in the chat box there during the last hour or so. But look, if anybody else joined in late and you want to access those or get credit for the IASIS points, just drop an email to myself or Owen in the next couple of days, and we'll make sure that that's organised. Owen, you just want to maybe flag another meeting we're having in a little while.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. Yeah, this is the third webinar in the series of webinars that we've been running, and we have a fourth one in the pipeline. Angela Huckle, who is the Associate Director of Crop Health in ADAS in the UK, is going to join us. She's heavily involved in herbicide trials with AHDB on a range of vegetable crops, and she'll be joining us to give an update on weed control options in root crops, brassicas and leafy salads. So that will probably take place at the end of March, and we'll be sending out an invitation shortly. And also as well, we've had feedback from attendees which we value on the previous webinars, and we're always open to feedback on and hearing topics maybe that growers or attendees might like us to cover. And we won't be able to cover them all, but it'll maybe point us in a direction that there's a demand for something there.
Okay, so thanks very much, Owen. Look, everyone, we've held you all a lot longer than we had anticipated. But look, I hope you found it useful. I hope you've learned something. Like I said, the slides and the notes and the actual recording of the event will be up on the YouTube, the Teagasc YouTube channel, and the Teagasc website within the next few days, and you're welcome to access it there. So thanks again, and good night to everyone, and God bless.